Ladies and gentlemen, come one, come all, welcome to the 2022 Electromagnetic Universe World Expo! This next presentation is a two-parter put on by Shifu Ramon. Shifu Ramon is a father, multiple business owner, martial artist instructor, and healer in traditional Chinese medicine. He has a background in electrical engineering from the University of Kentucky. He is from Kentucky, where he works on the Hidden Kentucky Project in tandem with the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association. He is the author of over 80 alt-stream papers in extended plasma electromagnetic cosmology and pioneer of open source cosmology. He is the host of the Electric Pulse on Rumble. You can find his shows on the Leak Project Wednesdays at 8 p.m. with Rex.
Very good. Name of this course or this presentation is a Epemc crash course, plasma glyphs, earthwork theory, and the megafauna extinction Younger Dryas event. How comparative mythology takes on a new depth with asymmetric keys. My name is Ramon Kiriaga. I am the creator of the open source cosmology, EPEMC, which stands for Extended Plasma Electromagnetic Cosmology. If you go to that website there and you click EPEMC tab, it will take you to my paper directory. It is an open source cosmology, which means that you all are the peer. There are no specific journals as of yet for our group. There are some standards listed. This slideshow, along with other slideshows, and obviously there's links within the slideshows that people will be able to access, will be available in the description of the video, which again will become available on Saturday, August 13th. Thank you for being here, and it's my pleasure to host the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association for this presentation. So we need to talk a little bit about comparative mythology and Dr. Anthony Peratt's theory. Of course, Dr. Anthony Peratt was a plasma physicist at Los Alamos Labs, and then later NASA JPL, which is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He's a plasma physicist, but he began to notice that there were these shapes that were appearing around the world. It wasn't Robert Schoch that discovered this. It was Dr. Peratt. These shapes matched the lab work that he was doing, and he came up with these set of glyphs. Of course, if we look at the past and we take into account Velikovsky's theory, we need to realize a few things in order to utilize these Peratt plasma glyphs. First of all, natives around the world, which would include native Greeks, for example, in history, they had no incentive to lie. So they didn't live in an era of journals and grant money. They didn't really have any of that reason. They did have a lot of anthropomorphism, and Velikovsky pointed out they had a lot of psychiatric trauma. So when we see this image on the right, this is from Kentucky, the concentric circle, they call it, but it's actually clearly a hexagon. So the question is, what is that carefully constructed partial hemisphere in the middle? Is it a planet or is it something else? If we are to believe that they were incapable of accurately recording the natural world, then we are going to need to discount a great amount of evidence in history. And the best evidence is always going to be rock art and then earthworks, which is the opposite of how it's been treated in archaeology. They have treated rock art as something to mostly ignore, and they focus mostly on pottery. But some of the most artistic work is going to be on the pottery, and some of the most accurate recordings of what's in the sky is going to be on rocks or in earthwork, mound form, etc. So it's a different lexicon for the people of the past, but it's the same real world that we have here. So planets, comets, lightning, volcanoes. It's not completely made up fiction like we are used to today. When we measure a lot of what we do with myth, it's mostly fantasy based. It's a tangible history. When you think about the Greeks, not just some immoral gibberish that is all coming together. So these shapes and motifs and archetypes, they need to pass some kind of acid test through time. This is something that Dave Talbot talked about in not only the Saturn myth, but also in his series, The Discourses of an Alien Sky. Alien meaning a foreign sky, foreign to how we currently see it. None of the descriptions from the ancient days match what we see in the sky today. And the obsessions with the gas giants and with the comets are out of proportion to how important they are to our eyes today. And we can tell because most people don't know where Jupiter or Mars are. They don't have any idea on a day-to-day situation. For us, imperfection in the rock art is not a sign of lack of sophistication. It's a statistical key, because the asymmetry enables us to compare shapes from different places and see where they overlap. And all the standouts give us some clues. Clues lead to factual evidence. This is empiricism. This data can be compiled and stats can be formed. And being that this is an open source cosmology, you are the peer reviewer and there are standards, you can volunteer. You can also refute whatever I assert or anybody else asserts. You don't need to ask permission from the archaeological community, which is, to me, pretty key. Okay, so where did it all start for me? Well, I'll be honest with you. It started with me when I was watching Dave Talbot talk, and I said, you know what? If he is correct, then I can get right up and go pull off the Rock Art of Kentucky book, and I can pull off the In Search of Ice Age Americans, and this stuff will be in there. And that's exactly what happened. The rock art, such as this one, was in there. That, by the way, that's the South Pole of Saturn. And the story that is later in the slides was in the Ice Age Americans in the introduction. And when I first noticed these asymmetric Awin glyphs, we use the Awin term because of the Kolbrin, it stood out to me as impossible that it could be an accident. So I actually went all the way to Eagle Mound and stood on the three-pointed Awin glyph, and indeed it is not symmetric the way that they point out. And this is repeated all over the place. I found the same thing. I just went to Three Rivers petroglyphs in New Mexico, found asymmetric Awin glyphs. So in Kolbrin, this IAO, which was also an acronym for Iasu Alpha and Omega. This sound was the secret name for God. It was a triple mountain, tri-force, triple godhead, etc. And this motif has existed for many, many thousands of years. And my contention would be that it's existed for probably about 7,000 to 10,000 years. It's not symmetric in most cases around the world. And I will show it depended probably on the location around the world tree. You can see it right here. The Alligator Mound, which is also in Ohio, has an opposite asymmetry to the Eagle Mound in terms of right versus left. What we're interested in is the ratio between the longest segment and the differential segment, so the A to D ratio. And it appears that the angle depended on where we were in rotation around this object. And we're going to go over what that object is later. But the angle determined whether or not it was a symmetric Awin or a different one. And there's another rock art from Kentucky that they're all over the place in lots of different shapes, which tells me that indeed my Shamash theory about the chaotic nature during the cataclysms is accurate. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a period of conjunction, and I can maybe briefly go over that, having to do with the Lagrange arrangement, basically what you see in the Alligator Mound, but mostly a form of chaos. And this relative chaos, created a lot of difficult situations for mankind. Okay, now the ratios for these A to Ds can be compared all around the world. And I've compared them Eagle Mound and from Red River Gorge, Kentucky, and New Mexico, like I mentioned, Göbekli Tepe. There's a skull map, and it's actually on there. And of course, the British Isles, which is where all the Celtic symbols come from. The typical ratio is from 9.3 to 17.4, but it could be more. It just depends on the angle in which they're seeing this. It's really unclear if it's Mars and Mercury at these intersecting junctions, but whatever it is, for whatever reason, energy was being extruded from the larger bodies, which were Jupiter, Saturn, and apparently Neptune, and then meeting along this cosmic pole, which is another type of motif. Uranus, the planet, is not Uranus the god, and Uranus the planet is probably the planet Hades. We don't know the god Hades. We don't know precisely where it shows up. It is only said in the Greek myths that Hades says, "I am a mind different from my brother Zeus." So he wasn't banished to the other world, but chose to be in the other world. And we know, of course, factually, that the planet Uranus has a massive tilt angle. I think it's like 105 degrees. So we don't see it typically show up in these sites until later, when suddenly there are 4. And all of this came from my research looking at the cosmic eggs. This is an example of the kind of display that we have in Kentucky. This is the Tar Springs Rock Shelter. First off, obviously, we can see lots of these Alwyn glyphs moving about in the sky, changing relative angle, relative length. They are not bird tracks. Birds don't make tracks like this. And Native Americans definitely knew what bird feet looked like. And in a number of instances, you can see the way that it's drawn tends to indicate some kind of rotation into the plane or towards us, and that it's been moving around the sky. So like newspaper rock, this appears to be a collection of events. Now, some of these, like number 14, reflect Chinese glyphs for, say, the word mask or thunder god. And then other ones, number 7, appear to be the flat smile glyph, which is a common motif around the world. In fact, when the Cincinnati Museum of Art had a number of Chinese artifacts come and visit, there was a little figurine riding a horse. It had that exact face on it. And that figurine dated back all the way, I think it was the Xia dynasty. So these spirals appear to be, of course, our gas giants, but originally numbers 4 and 5, when the star first splits apart, forming proto-Saturn and proto-Jupiter, and then material in between in creating this owl eye motif. This is also a worldwide event, a worldwide motif. And these motifs repeat often enough that we can get lots of information from it. Now, on the right there, we have, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but we have a very famous Nordic symbol. I want to direct, of course, first of all, to the synchrotrons, the toroids that are in the synchrotrons. These look exactly like what are in the Chinese guas or trigrams, but also I got a photo just 2 weeks ago at Three Rivers Petroglyphs, the same exact design on the rocks there. But the thing that I'm most interested in are the runes. We have, of course, in the middle arrow, we have the Taran or T rune, and that Taran means thunderbolt. And then we have the B rune, which is the 2 mountain motif. And then finally, we have the peace symbol, which is the Lagrange arrangement. And these appear to be also a worldwide motif that indicates something about the Younger Dryas event. Now, what it is exactly, it takes time stepping through all of the evidence. And unfortunately, this is a crash course, but all the evidence and the cosmic egg data. And then you begin to see that what we're talking about is when the star breaks into its pieces, then there are, quote, 2 mountains in the sky. And in Enlil, in the Mesopotamia, Enlil is the elder, but Enki is the firstborn, which is, of course, impossible. Here in Kentucky, again, we see this ally motif, and we see the Alwyn glyph associated with it. Over on the right, there we have, what is that, the Reedyville petroglyphs, also Kentucky. And we see these same motifs. So we cannot assume it's the same culture that's making all of these recordings. What is probably best to assume is that different tribes are seeing the same one thing. the interpretation of the two-faced god over on the right, and the egg splitting, and then the great man coming down from below with the exploding. This is probably the single best glyph of the event outside of what comes out of the Colombian rock art, which is, instead of carved, it's painted. And that is, of course, extremely useful. We have a number of other repeated. We have the ally. We have the funny shaped birds. We have the asymmetric alwyn there. And of course, we have the foot motif, which sometimes is missing toes. We also have what's a Kolbrin sign there, the X cross, the cross, which basically refers to the winds of destruction. And that has correlation in the Chinese. There is a use of the cross, that X cross, in the word for insect, and it means a plague, as in a plague of locusts, and is associated with the winds of destruction. Of course, we see that all the way into the biblical story. And of course, we see the triple god face, the funny looking, what looks like the Pukul heads from Princess Mononoke. It looks like a funny little face with a kind of an open mouth, but that's just our modern minds playing tricks on us. It's actually the star when it broke into the triple godhead. Now, this motif from asphalt rock in Kentucky, we see that there is all the hallmarks from Peratt's work. We have the synchrotron on the left, looks like an hourglass, but you can also see that there was a toroid going around, and when it's lighter in phase on this side, but when it goes around three-dimensionally into the paper, that's where you get the bright glow happening. Now, bear in mind, this is the Coy Fuller textbook, the Rock Art of Kentucky. They have no idea what any of this means. They're naming it according to their modern understanding, and they're the only ones that have gone out and found all of these in Kentucky. But now we can cross compare with other sites. For example, the animal that the red arrow is pointing to, we see the same egg shape with the exploding heads, sometimes a tail, the two legs. This is the really important part, the two legs. And we see this in Göbekli Tepe, and we see it in South America, we see it in Asia, we see it in Africa. And that's not diffusion. So now we can also see the squatter man is confirmed to be part of this whole synchrotron. And we're now seeing that the Eden, E-D-I-N, of the Sumerian is also maybe the spirit world, which is also maybe these plasma shapes up in the sky. This is a famous one I really enjoy. This is in Utah. It's kind of a funny story. It doesn't look like it now, but it used to look like a pterodactyl. And so there was an argument between the archaeological community and the creationists as to whether or not humans were witnessing pterodactyls. So they went ahead and cleaned it up, and the archaeological community claimed triumph over the creationists, except what they really discovered was catastrophism. And so we can see here the great man associated again with the first two, the twin warrior gods, and then the thunderbolts coming down and apparently killing the animals. We also see a comet on the right. It is noted in some of the myths that Saturn was a comet-like in those early days. But you see the animal with the in this case, a head missing and the back exploding and the legs coming off the side. We see that in Göbekli Tepe. So the cosmic egg. What happened for me was that I created the plasma glyph paper, and then I did the addendum 1 where I covered the thunderbolt and the fact that we had figured out that for sure there wasn't a comet that struck in Michigan, right? It struck in Greenland. And so I released addendum 1. And in plasma glyph, in the original paper, I didn't have a vector for this electricity other than the moon. But then I started to analyze these different eggs from that were showing up in all over the world. At first, I did the Ramsey Stele, which you see here the data for, and which it was within 1% of satellite measurement. Saturn with a diameter ratio where your equatorial diameter is then divided by your polar diameter. And the key here is that the sun is always 1 to 1, and the Earth, all the rocky bodies are also 1 to 1. So when we see these shapes and they're not 1 to 1, we can identify them statistically versus the actual gaseous bodies. Well, I first did this with the Ramsey Sleigh because it talked about the 2 solar abodes. And I have over 80 papers. Unfortunately, I have to condense everything. But trust me, you can go and you can look at that paper and you can click the link, go look at the paper, and you will be convinced that what Budge was translating, he was misunderstanding what he was translating. But over on the right, you see a couple of Egyptian artifacts. You can see that the ratio of the one on the right with the flat smile is very likely to be 1.23, and possibly the one up there. I can't remember. It's in my paper. I can't remember where that one comes from. The one in the upper right there is Lexington. Now that earthwork is gone. It's lost forever. I think that its ratio was 1.7, but it has all of the features that we see at the enclosure D in the bottom left. And these features are a flat side, a flat butt, and a bulge, and then an extension. Now, it's really key, the extension. Of course, the Göbekli Tepe one is pretty well engineered. They appear to have been a very fastidious culture. The bulge is where the vulture stone or vulture stele is located, and it shows the same features on it, and it's located there, which indicates to me that something was actually erupting. And so now we know probably what the source of that explosion and that comet, that subsequent comet, is probably the birth of Venus based on the Mayan Nahuatl. But apparently it extended from this 1.23 way out to past 2 to 1, and then it began to rupture. And no matter how many different times you do the analysis, you never find the ratio for Uranus, but you always find a mixture of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. When it exploded at the top, we get lots of 5-legged motifs or exploding back motifs. Sometimes it's exploding horses, sometimes exploding deer, exploding goats. I saw out in the Three Rivers petroglyph because there's all the desert rams. But it just depends on the culture as to how they saw it. Here in Kentucky, you can see there's a five-legged turtle. Asymmetry gives us the key. You can go through 35 pages of Addendum 2, or you can, in the citations in the Addendum 2, you can open up the spreadsheet and look at it via the spreadsheet. And another key note I want to point out is that often you'll see this explosion on the left part, not out of the back, but on the left part, as a lion coming out. Now that lion in the Hindu frequently is seen as a Shiva god, the lion head, who maims other gods, literally rips their guts out. And so I think that it is the birth of the planet Neptune based on the so-called Nazca meme cat, but we need a lot more work to know exactly. And in South America, it may not have been a jaguar, it may have been a capybara, but in Mesopotamia or in the Middle East region, it appears they also agreed that it is a lion. And so all the stages, all the different kinds of steles that you see over there, like your alligators and lizards, all these appear to be just variations of what was happening to the star in the sky. We have no idea how long this process could have taken. Could have taken the entire Younger Dryas period. So this is the Columbian rock art. You can see what I'm talking about with the capybara on the left there as the star is exploding. This is the actual, I guess, zoom up picture. I guess the Earth came closer to Shamash at some point. On the left portion of it is the anode tufting that happened on Proto-Saturn. And on the right is the formations of the banding of Jupiter. And we know that that's the bandings of Jupiter because we also have Indian rock art that shows the same thing with the same Z banding. And in the Indian, we see the Z banding and a red spot. So apparently the flat butt side is the Jupiter side. The flat down side is just extending, and the bulge is coming out of Saturn, which matches, again, the Nahuatl. whether or not that is the origin of Neptune, or if Neptune has some form of bubble that came by the plasma pouring down. We're not exactly sure. And the Ramayana, Rama and Lakshmana are grabbed by the Bhukundi, and it's a one-eyed blue monster with no neck, just a head and these long arms. Then they shoot him with their arrows and he turns into a god. And then the three become like brothers. Of course, the Ramayana is extremely ancient. Right. So sometimes they explain cohesion better than diffusion. In the Tower of Babel story, we have clear evidence of some diffusion. However, there's a mention that everybody's speaking the same language. Well, what could this language be? I contend that it could be the plasma glyphs. We do know, though, that there was diffusion. There's mRNA and mitochondrial DNA, people moving all over the place. We see some of the DNA is actually like people getting to South America before they're getting to North America. That's been talked about by plenty of people now. But what's interesting to me is also we see Chinese glyphs that have the same meaning as Kolbrin runes, the runes having names. So for an example, we have weapon. In Chinese, the word weapon or halberd is ge. Now, halberd, if you remember, is a form of trident. Trident, we think of Poseidon. So we again come back to the same thing. When we see the Chinese word for mask, we often see the Alwyn sign as it extends forward. So it's possible that the electricity was also taking the shape of the Alwyn glyph in the sky. So this repetition of form could have meant quite a bit to the natives. We don't really know much about their religions prior to bureaucratic religions. I'd say we don't hardly know anything even about the Egyptian religion, mostly just what we project, our fascination with Asia and in Asia Minor and our ideas of how foreign and exotic they are. Whereas everything that I see, the Egyptians were highly logical, engineer-based culture. But when we look at the Chinese weapon, ge, it means oneself. And it has the alpha fish and the cosmic pole. And it has the Kolbrin runes. This, get back to the point. The rune weapon is in the Chinese glyph. So when we look at the Chinese, we see that the thunderbolt was God sometimes. And so Shangdi, like El or Elohim, was sometimes himself and sometimes his satellites or the combination. And I've already mentioned about the Tehran meaning thunderbolt, but also that the word shock in Chinese meant earthquake. And earthquake is, I believe it's translated, I have to look for sure in one of my papers, but I do believe that it meant to stomp or tremor. And there's multiple references when you look in the sumo, the meaning of the clothing in the sumo traditions. I have a whole paper on this. Multiple references to hammers and earthquakes. So Proto-Saturn, which is Walt Thornhill's idea, and Jupiter, or what I prefer to call Proto-Jupiter, because we have no idea how many satellites came out of Jupiter during this process. They were originally one, which matches the Chinese, because the Chinese say the one became the two became the three, and the three became the 10,000 things. And this we call Shamash or Maza, Ra, Zervan, El. I prefer Zervan myself, but I use Shamash because Shamash is the most common Mesopotamian name for this god. And this is like a open secrets. It's a well-known fact that this is what they're talking about. It's not a matter of aliens. When we look at the Twin Warriors and we see an Enki in the World Order, which is a text, it's not a Sitchin text, it's an actual text that's translated by academia. Enki is both he's the firstborn, but Enlil is his elder brother. That's not possible biologically. And also Enki could not ejaculate and fill the Tigris and Euphrates River. So when we touched Enki on the left side, apparently it caused a deluge, according to Enki in the World Order. And when we look at the isotopes for Saturn's rings, it matches the isotopes for our oceans. I'm not saying there was no ice age. That isn't to be known yet. That is a contention made in what's that text? It might be the cycle of cosmic catastrophes. I'd have to look for sure, but they do make a good point about the ice. How would it flow uphill from the center, from the sea level in the Hudson Bay? However, it's not a contention I'm making, but I am saying the world was filled up with more water because it was written very matter-of-factly. And I have an entire show I did with Greg J on that. The Columbian rock art finally is able to fill in the map that we see from the Maputo Baconi earthworks that I have a paper on to those earthworks in Sardinia and other places in the Mediterranean and like peri-African regions where you see suddenly 4 or more eggs forming. And of course, I already mentioned the Ramayana. So these ideas are echoed in native myth and rock art. When I was in the Southwest, we also visited Shipping Rock. When you listen to the story of Rock Monster, the tale begins with the twin warriors, and the twin warriors are slaying monsters in the sky. So there's thunderbolts coming and they're destroying, and all the natives tend to agree that it was the purpose was to slay the evil animals and evil people, and sometimes they combine them together as if the two were in cahoots with each other. This might explain the effect of if people, as you know, if people survive something, they tend to feel guilty, and so they may have felt after they came down from the mountain after these giant floods, maybe we did something wrong, or maybe mankind did something wrong in general, when of course it had nothing to do with us at all. And this is what the natives said. This was in Search of Ice Age America. So Thomas Jefferson, who's often referred to as the father of American archaeology, was fascinated with both the Macedons and the Ice Age Americans. And unlike Franklin, when he was talking about the Big Bone Lake of Kentucky, Jefferson was convinced that people lived in the Americans at the same time Macedons were living in Big Bone Lake. His reasoning was based in part on oral tradition of the Delaware Indians, which he'd recorded firsthand. So again, open secrets. During the American Revolution, Jefferson met a group of Delaware Indians and asked them what happened to the great animal whose bones were found in the salt lakes of the Ohio. The chief in the group stood up and said, "In ancient times, a herd of these tremendous animals came to the Big Bone Lakes and began a universal destruction of the bear, deer, elk, buffaloes, and other animals which had been created for use of the Indians, and that the great man above, the Shangdi, which I think it's a Sulukan, looking down, seeing this, was so enraged he seized his lightning, descended on the earth, seated himself on a neighboring mountain, and on a rock on which his seat and the print of his feet, hurled his bolts among them till the whole were slaughtered, except the big bull," obviously referring to the Taurus motif, "who, presenting his forehead to the shaft, shook them off as they fell, but missing one link, wounded him in the side." And here we're reminded of Gilgamesh slaying the bull. Whereon, springing around, he bounded over the Ohio, over the Wabash, the Illinois, and finally over the Great Lakes, where he is living to this day. Now, the reference to over the Great Lakes also reminds us that it is possible that the Great Lakes themselves were formed by electric cataclysm. We don't know for sure, but there are people who make that contention. I don't make that contention myself. I would say that it's something that was as large as that. Just like the Grand Canyon, this would be a larger event than the single thunderbolt that we have a picture of, but we don't know. There's lots of different forms of these thunderbolts, and the electricity can behave in many different ways depending on whether you're using arcs, electric fields, or are we talking plasma generated thunderbolts that come down from the plasma sphere. There's also these bands of arcs that go around the earth that we can energize with, say, nuclear weapons, and they will spontaneously discharge to the earth. And we see a lot of these destructions happening at the 30-degree latitude. It may be why the Great Pyramids were destroyed. I'm off topic, but we see things like the Barringer Crater right there around 30-some degrees in the northern hemisphere. So the answer that I've come up with is step potential.
Thank you for being here for the first part of this 2-part presentation. Make sure to check up and look for part 2. See you next time.